Lisa, Natalie, and Parag, I am absolutely privileged to facilitate the discussion. You can see Maria's savvy in that she may be the facilitator, which will cut time down on my time talking, which is good for everybody listening. You've got their bios. I want to fill the 20 minutes we've got with their wisdom. I mean, you've got who they are, at everywhere from MasterCard to Aspen to AARP Foundation. What was amazing to me in the prep was that they each bring a really different vantage point, and even a really different solution around this notion of investing in people. The way I started off with them, and maybe this is my bias coming from Mentor, was this notion that, well, there's nothing controversial about this. Nobody's going to picket or protest that you shouldn't invest in people. And they each rolled out kind of like, well, here's how it doesn't happen, and here's how it does. So we want to tackle a little bit of that in the 20 minutes that we have together. I would tell you just at Mentor, our whole sort of orientation towards this is, how do we create a relationships first movement? How do we look at systems like education and workforce and juvenile justice and look at relationships as the core to the solution, not the ancillary, not the lag, but the lead? Put them in the center. How do we do that intentionally with investment of time and money? And I think right now, at a time when, as my son would joke, every commercial says now more than ever we must be connected, you would think we're going to value relationship more than ever. But there's still a question of, will we do that outside our families? Will we do that across biases? Will we do that within systems? And I think that's what the moment is challenging us from an economic and a racial standpoint more than ever before. Someone said earlier in the conference, there is no racial justice without economic justice. I think that's a lot of what we'll tackle this morning as we talk about investing in people. Because before I go to Lisa to sort of lead us off, the question isn't controversial when you talk about should we invest in people. When it becomes controversial is when we start to ask about who and how. And that's where we've fallen short. And that's where I think the panel can bring us a lot of individual solutions, but also a lot of systemic solutions that go beyond one great nonprofit or one great employer, but really are scalable, system-wide solutions that could reorient us towards that economic and racial justice that we all see. So, Lisa, why don't I start off with you from AARP's, perspective. And if we talk a little bit about, you're, president of the AARP Foundation. I, of course, know you mostly from Experience Corps and intergenerational mentoring and literacy work you all do so amazingly well across the nation. But as you at the foundation envision a country free of poverty and where no person feels invulnerable, these are the values and tenets to which you guys hold. When we talk about investing people and building resilient, especially in this moment when our vulnerability has been revealed, why is it so important that we include older adults in this conversation? And what are some of the ways we invest in older workers and low-income older workers from your vantage point?
Yeah, thanks, David. It's really great to be with you and to be with Natalie and Parag as well. And a huge shout out to Maria, Grace, and the entire Jobs for the Future team for having us. I think about the conversations I've had with you and we did in our pre-call that where we talked about meaning and belonging as being such a key part also of developing economic resiliency for all people. And so I start from that point of view. Work is such a big part of purpose and of belonging and meaning, and too many low-income older adults have been left out over time. So that's way pre-COVID, or civil unrest right now, which addresses structural racism and inequities that have gone on for 400 years in our nation. So just if we start with the facts of the current economic crisis, the second highest group to suffer are older adults 65 and older. And within older adults 50 and older women are really being left behind. When you think about older workers, they're often low-income workers in low-wage jobs. And then there are racial disparities. So even among low-income older workers who are low-wage workers, 43% are Black Americans, 54% are Latinx. And so we have to address these equity issues and the intersectionality of identity. There are a lot of barriers for low-income older workers, and it starts with the inability for us to realize that older workers need access to quality jobs too. And so addressing access to quality jobs means that we really need to think about what we're doing that's different. How are we disrupting that? How are we providing training, bridging digital divide, and really making investments that will pay off for the individuals, will help us build a more just, economically resilient society for all, but also really help the bottom line in business. Because study after study, including the work at AARP, clearly indicates that it's good for business to be age inclusive when you're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Good for the bottom line, employees say that they want to work in age diverse environments. David, you know this from your work. Mentoring happens across the lifespan. We surely know it at AARP Foundation with Back to Work, Work for Yourself, our senior community service and employee program as well. But what we have to tip is really making the critical investments in upskilling and reskilling across the work lifespan for older adults and for all people. And the benefits will be great. Older adults want to have access to those opportunities.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I turn to you, Parag, and you said this thing in our prep call. I thought it was the best. I repeated it to my kids at dinner. You said, how do we make sure this time is different? We don't want to return from whence we came, and you heard a lot that came before us about who gets hurt the most and who's the last to benefit. And we can study recession over recession. Talk to me about this moment. You sort of couched it in a really amazing historic lens in our prep call, but also this, to fast forward us maybe from the plague to the modern day, which you did in our prep call amazingly. Talk to me about technology and portability and what you're seeing, and just a really powerful solution that you guys are working on and that you're working on.
Yeah, thank you, David. And thanks to JFF for this incredible opportunity to address this topic, because you're exactly right, David, is we don't want to just come out and recover from this episode. We want to come out better than we were before. And what I looked at as I looked at previous global crises, whether it was the bubonic plague in the 1300s or the big cholera outbreak in the 1800s, it changed fundamental structures about policy and about how the employer and employee relationship worked. We didn't see that kind of structural change happen after the Great Recession of 2008. We kind of went back to business as usual. And the message here, both when we talk about the recovery from COVID, but also when we talk about the new focus on racial justice, we have to make sure that we change certain structural elements. And for us at MasterCard and at the Center for Inclusive Growth, that has really been for a long time around these two seemingly competing values of financial security and economic mobility. Can you have one without the other? And what we believe is they're actually not competing, they're complementary. In the world we live in today, the idea that a worker is tethered to an employer, to a place, in order to get the fundamental things that they need, the things that Lisa just talked about in terms of their dignity and their self-worth, but also their health insurance and their paid time off and their childcare subsidies. That no longer makes sense. That structure was born in the 1930s and it doesn't work in 2020. So what we are looking at is how do you create opportunities for workers to navigate the digital economy with lifelong learning? How do you help them access and pay for and take the time off they're going to need to skill for that next job? But here's what's key in it. When we talk about who benefits, it cannot just be the people who can afford it. It cannot just be the people at the so-called base of the pyramid. We need structures and policies that benefit everybody. Because when my destiny is tied to the destiny of the cashier at Macy's, then I'm more invested in it. And that's what we saw with Social Security. FDR didn't create Social Security just for the most poor. He created Social Security for everybody. My grandfather, who was an immigrant to this country, 10 years after he got here, started getting Social Security checks. His destiny was tied to the destiny of every other person in his community. And that's what we need with a portable benefit system, one where we're all brought into it, we're all paying into it, but it also allows us to move from place to place and job to job with some security.
Parag, thank you so much. And it's a perfect segue to Natalie, who talked about this paradigm shift of we have always invested in people through their employers, right? And whether it's the gig economy or whether it's our current unemployment rate, we are seeing that social contract is not real helpful at the moment, and maybe not real helpful for our modern reality. You also made the point that when it comes to UBI, we might be asking the wrong questions. And I loved and hope you'll share with the virtual crowd what you said about that. And also said that in a historical context, you all brought up historical context, that UBI may not be such a radical idea, even though it seems that way at this moment in time. It's just a question again of this who we've done it for. So let me turn it over to you, Natalie, and take us on this journey.
Yeah, well, I would just start by saying, the social contract, I think we're in the midst of a deep reckoning with and rewriting of in this moment, and it's insufficient, and we need to strengthen it and build on it. I just think it's never been more clear that now is the moment to invest in families and communities in the midst of a pandemic, an economic crisis, and now a long overdue racial reckoning in America. Let's give people money so they can pay their rent, put food on the table, and get to the hard work of progress that this nation needs. I'll tell you the story of Tomas. Tomas lives in Stockton, California, and Stockton is one of the places to demonstrate the idea of a guaranteed income. So Mayor Michael Tubbs, he's one of the youngest mayors in America. He read about the idea of a guaranteed income in Dr. King's last book and said, I want to do that. We should do it in Stockton, a city that looks like America, racially and economically, and has come out of a lot of difficulty. It was one of the first big cities to go bankrupt and is now being reinvented. So launched a demonstration of the idea, which is simple, that there's an income floor that no one can fall below, no matter what happens, no matter what happens in the workforce, no matter a great pandemic, that everyone deserves and has an amount each month that they can count on. So 125 families in Stockton receive $500 a month, and Tomas is one of these families. And with the $500 each month, Tomas was able to quit his third gig and use that time to invest in something he'd long wanted, which was a managerial track job. He was able to use the time to buy a suit, to apply for the jobs, to do the interviews, to do the prep, to do the follow-up. And right before COVID hit, Tomas got what he wanted, which was a long-term, managerial track job. Tomas was able to invest in himself and invest in his family and his community. And, so often people say, well, what are you finding? How do people spend the money? And the answer is people spend the money exactly how you'd imagine: on rent, on utilities, on food. I mean, that's how Americans spent their $1,200 stimulus check that came, last month, on the basics. The real question is, what does it do? What does it mean in people's lives? For Tomas, it meant time to invest in his family. He spent more time with his kids, something he has very powerful stories around, but he also spent, the time looking for work. So it's time and it's belonging and mattering. Do I feel like I belong in my community? Do I feel like I matter? And it's very tied up with economics as well. So I think the big idea here is also a guarantee that every human has worth and dignity. And in the richest nation on earth, we could guarantee a set of things that ensure that everyone lives with that dignity.
Yeah, Natalie, man, it's hard to say much after that. You'd love to, that is as basic and most important and hardest to pull off at this moment in time, somewhat depressingly, but also upliftingly in terms of where we can go from here if we don't return, from whence we came, as Parag said. Lisa, I'd love to give the audience something to do, something to think about, knowing that they all are doing a lot in this space, or they probably wouldn't find themselves in this virtual conference. But if there were, and I'm going to go around the horn, so Natalie and Parag, you can listen to this too, and we've got about 7 minutes, so I'll ask you each to be a minute or two here. If you could ask the crowd to advocate for something, change a behavior, learn about something, what would that be? What is your call to this audience?
You're asking me for one, and I can't have that, because now I want to talk to Parag and I want to talk to Natalie about, guaranteeing income. But as Parag said, what does that mean also about social safety net and employers really investing in all of these other safety net issues, paid time off, caregiving leave, all of these things that matter. But my call would be the following. A reminder to all of us: age discrimination is illegal. And so let's remember that, and for a good reason. We all need to have opportunities to be financially resilient across our lifespan. So think long and hard about the value of experienced workers and your investment in their mobility, and how important it is for employers and the workforce system in this moment, as Natalie and Parag have both said, it's a reckoning, it's a reconciliation, it's something we face with unflinching truth. We have not been investing in an equitable manner in people. And investing in people means knowing who has been left behind, including low-income older workers and low-income workers of color, and investing more in advancing their opportunities. It is good for them individually. Parag, as you said so importantly, it is really important for all of us. We have a shared humanity at stake here.
Wow. I thank you, Lisa, for that call. Parag, you want to take another bite at the apple here?
Yeah, agree with everything that Lisa said. And I would just add, if you're looking for an action, it's to start asking about these things, because when I have talked with state legislators, when I have talked to members of Congress about portable benefits, when I've talked to other employers, the first reaction is, sounds like a great idea, not sure it's doable, but nobody's asking for it. And so we have to be the ones that ask for it, because it's hard to imagine a different system when you've been so stuck in the one that we have and you think it's been there forever. It's kind of like this conversation about defund the police, right? It's that we think that police units have been there all along. And if you don't know the history of how policing came to be, then you think that this is the only way it could ever be. This is a moment of questioning everything. And not in a negative or cynical way, but questioning everything in a proactive way to say, could we build a system that's better? And so I think that technology has a role to play. Obviously, we want whatever the solution is to be human-centric, to be designed for the user. But we don't necessarily have to wait for a government to create a legislation or a regulation. We can start building the technology now. And I'm so excited about the technologies that are already out there. The National Domestic Workers Alliance has been in the field with ALEA to help housekeepers get paid better and get access to paid leave. The state of Washington at the beginning of this year started paid family and medical leave, and they're doing it in a way that is digital and portable and allows workers and employers to pay into the system. So the technology is already being put out there, and we need more of that. We need more tech companies to take the leadership role here. I'm excited to see gig companies now coming to the table saying that we want to create a social safety net for our workers. Let's have government and the private sector work together and work in parallel.
And invest in scaling those great solutions, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And that's where I think cities are really leading the way, right, as the laboratories of democracy. To sort of pick up, Parag, on your point about ALEA and the National Domestic Workers Alliance, you also had the city of Philadelphia say, in my city, every caregiver deserves paid time off. So you have to, pay into an account. So caregivers who are not part of the social contract, right, that we created in the United States between employer and employees, because of our long history that also has to do with race as well as economics on how we pass laws in the United States, means that caregivers work generally outside of the formal contract. And so when Philadelphia said everyone deserves paid time off, we're going to figure out how we get there. It was, I think, a really powerful moment where you saw policy, which scales what we saw technology already starting to do through ALEA and the National Domestic Workers Alliance, much like what we're seeing in Stockton, where you have a mayor demonstrating what a guaranteed income would look like, and what we're seeing in Jackson, Mississippi, where Aisha Nyandaro, who is a social entrepreneur in Jackson, is running the Magnolia Mothers Trust. And that is a trust that gives $1,000 a month to single Black mothers who have long been on the downside of a broken economic system, and gives them room to breathe. And so I see what's happening at the city level, and I think it's really inspiring. But we're definitely in a moment where where it's time to take these things national, given how strapped cities and states are soon to be.
It's so great.
Can I just add? No, go ahead, Lisa.
The facilitator has lost all control. Let's go.
Told you we wanted to talk to each other.
To me, that's the sign of a good panel. Why don't we go Lisa quickly, Parag quickly, and then I got to roll.
I was just going to jump in with Parag and Natalie, because as you both are talking, I mean, it's powerfully reminding me that we have these ongoing conversations about more innovation. We need to iterate. That's too risky. But, we're beyond that. There are, as you said, both of you, Natalie and Parag, there are incubators out there. We certainly know in our innovation work at AARP Foundation, where you have evidence of proven solutions that can work with workers at all levels and all ages. So let's come together, just agree that we have the will to do what's right for this nation and for workers, for all workers, in particular, building more for those who have been the most left behind over time. Let's just get it done.
Yeah. And I would just add to what both of you said, I think that since we're doing the big think right now, let's really be bold and ask ourselves the question, what do the workers want? They want choice. Why do we have to have a system where my health insurance is over here and my transit subsidies here and my paid leaves here? Why can't it be a system of maybe a points accumulation, and you can spend your points on whatever you want? You want to get an x-ray? That's 5 points. You want to take 6 weeks off to learn a skill? That's 100 points. At different points in our lives, we need different benefits more than others. So if we're going to rethink the system, let's rethink it in terms of giving the maximum flexibility and choice to the worker. And also, Natalie, to your point about Philadelphia, I think we also have to think about the role of who pays, because it doesn't always have to be binary of employer pays or government pays. We could have a system where the worker is a contributor, friends and family are contributors, that your employers, or if you're a gig worker, the platforms that you work through are funders. Why can't it be a multifaceted source of inputs and outputs of how the points get accumulated and how they get spent?
So I'm going to wrap us. I'm not being paid for this gig, but they can fire me, I think, or just pull the plug on our panel.
We want to keep going.
I know you do. There's a lot more to say, but I got to wrap us up, unfortunately, and all of us are accessible to everyone who's on the line, I'm sure, to talk more individually. What I would ask, my call to you, would be to resist what's hard. Cities are canceling summer internships because they're too hard to do virtually. That's a gigantic mistake. And we need to fight that. And I would also ask you to ask people who are proximate and different than you, people who ask their kids about how they enter jobs or make those decisions based on their own perspective of their own job paths in the world, are making huge mistakes because they're not asking a diverse enough population. And so listen to young people, make sure pathways aren't just about access, they're also guided, so we can guide towards occupational identity, career pathing, and that pathways are supported, and that you're really thinking about the way in which a pathway is coupled with a human being and employees are treated human-centrically, so that they can build going forward. So I thank you guys. We could go on, maybe off camera, we'll go on for a while for ourselves, but we're all here and in this fight with all of you on the line, and I know we all would welcome further conversation on all of this. Lisa, Natalie, Parag, thank you guys. JFF, thanks so much.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.